Sophia walked into the philosophy lecture hall, head held high despite the sea of judgmental eyes. The room was buzzing, filled with students dressed casually in shorts and sleeveless tops, while Sophia's modest outfit and hijab stood in stark contrast. She had grown accustomed to whispers, sneers, and sideways glances. Today was no different. A faint, mocking chuckle from the back corner was followed by another, and Sophia could feel the quiet sting of their ridicule. Even though her steps were steady, her heart felt heavy. She knew what lay ahead. Another day of being the odd one out. In the corner, a group of students whispered behind cupped hands, stealing occasional glances at her. "Fanatic," someone muttered, followed by stifled laughter. Sophia gripped her notebook tighter, her resolve growing stronger. She would not let their mockery define her. Taking her seat, she scanned the room. The atmosphere was thick with an unspoken tension. Sophia reminded herself why she was here: to learn, to grow, and to remain steadfast in her convictions. This class, with its harsh discussions on religion, was a test of her patience and strength. She knew that staying silent wasn't an option today. It was time to show them her faith was not a weakness, but a source of unwavering strength. As Professor Anderson entered, the room hushed. His reputation for sharp, scathing criticism of religion was well known. He greeted the class with a thin smile. "Today," he began, "we tackle one of the most baffling questions. Why, in this modern age, do people still cling to ancient dogmas?" His eyes scanned the room before settling on Sophia. "Take Islam, for instance," he said. "Fasting without logical basis. Circling a stone in Mecca as if it holds supernatural power. How can such practices stand up to reason?" Some students chuckled. Sophia, however, remained still, her heart racing, but her face calm. The professor's remarks weren't just academic provocations. They were a direct challenge to her beliefs. Anderson's questions hung in the air, heavy with doubt and mockery. The professor walked across the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Surely," he added, "there's no room for such outdated rituals in a world of science and logic. Would anyone care to explain why this persists?" Sophia felt a familiar knot tightening in her chest. She knew that if she didn't speak up, her silence would only reinforce their assumptions. Slowly she raised her hand. A few heads turned, surprised. Even the professor paused mid-stride, his eyebrows arching slightly. The room quieted as everyone waited. Sophia's voice was steady as she began. "Professor, have you considered that some of these so-called outdated practices have a deeper purpose? For instance, studies in modern science have shown the benefits of fasting, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. It can improve brain function, promote cell regeneration, and even reduce inflammation." The students who had been snickering moments earlier fell silent. Some glanced at each other, as if reconsidering their own knowledge of fasting. Professor Anderson, however, was not easily swayed. "But what about the pilgrimage to Mecca?" he countered. "Is there scientific evidence to support walking around a black stone?" His tone was dismissive, the sarcasm unmistakable. "Surely, that's nothing more than an outdated tradition." Sophia met his gaze without hesitation. At its core, Hajj isn't just about physical acts. It's about unity and equality. Think of major international events where people from all over the world come together. They wear similar attire, move in unison, and feel a collective purpose. Hajj does the same, but it transcends borders, race, and status. It's a reminder that humanity is united under one creator. The room grew quieter. A few students who had initially scoffed at her words now seemed to consider them carefully. Even the professor's expression softened, if only slightly. For the first time in the discussion, Sophia felt that she had opened a door, even if just a crack, for deeper understanding. Professor Anderson adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. All right, Sophia, let's move on to another question. If Islam claims that God is merciful and just, how do you explain hell? Isn't eternal punishment contradictory to mercy? His tone was sharp, his question clearly meant to corner her. Sophia took a moment, her hands resting lightly on her desk. Then she said, "Professor, justice and mercy are not mutually exclusive. Imagine a court of law. If a judge allowed criminals to walk free without any consequence, would you call that just?" Some students nodded slightly, acknowledging the logic in her analogy. Professor Anderson hesitated, but eventually replied, "No, justice requires accountability." Sophia pressed on, her voice firm but calm. "Exactly. Islam teaches that life is a test, and that everyone is given free will. With that free will comes responsibility. Hell isn't evidence of a lack of mercy. It's a consequence of people choosing to reject good and embrace evil. Just as we have courts and laws in society, the divine system also holds us accountable for our choices." The class remained quiet, many of the students deep in thought. Even those who had been mocking her earlier seemed less certain now. Professor Anderson tilted his head, considering her words. For the first time in their ongoing dialogue, his usual sharp retorts were absent. Sophia knew she hadn't changed his mind, at least not yet, but she sensed a shift in the room. Doubt was creeping in, and perhaps for some, curiosity as well. Professor Anderson shifted gears. "Well, Sophia," he said, his tone becoming sharper, "what about women in Islam? Why must they cover themselves? Isn't the hijab a symbol of oppression? Shouldn't a truly free society allow women to dress as they please?" Sophia raised her head slightly, a calm confidence in her voice. "Professor, freedom isn't just about taking something off. It's about the right to choose. Muslim women who wear the hijab do so for many reasons: spirituality, modesty, identity, and above all, personal choice. Would you consider it oppressive if a woman decides to wear a business suit or a uniform? Why should choosing a headscarf be any different?" A murmur passed through the class. Some students began to nod subtly, while others glanced at one another, considering her point. Professor Anderson, caught off guard, attempted a rebuttal. "But what about those who are forced? Isn't that proof that the hijab is inherently oppressive?" Sophia's eyes softened as she replied, "Any compulsion, in any form, goes against Islamic principles. The Quran explicitly says there is no compulsion in religion. True freedom is allowing a woman to decide for herself, without pressure to wear or not wear the hijab. Unfortunately, people sometimes misuse culture or traditions to force things on women. That isn't Islam, that's human error." For a moment, the professor seemed at a loss. The students sat quietly, the usual snickers replaced with quiet reflection. Sophia's words had challenged their preconceived notions, leaving them to question what freedom and choice truly meant. Professor Anderson regrouped, leaning forward as if readying his next strike. "If Islam is so fair, Sophia, then explain the rules of inheritance. Why are women given half the share of men? Isn't that blatant discrimination?" Sophia maintained her calm, a small smile forming on her lips. "Professor, it's not about worth, it's about responsibilities. In Islam, men are obligated to provide for their families, not just their spouses, but also their parents and siblings if needed. Women, on the other hand, have no such financial duties. They can keep their inheritance entirely for themselves." Some students furrowed their brows, grappling with this perspective. One even whispered to a friend, "That's actually interesting." Professor Anderson crossed his arms. "So you're saying it's about balance, not favoritism?" "Exactly," Sophia replied. "It's not a simple division of wealth. It's an economic structure designed to ensure everyone's needs are met. A woman's share might be smaller, but her financial independence is protected. The system considers obligations and responsibilities, not just numbers." A hush fell over the room. The logic of her explanation caused several students to reconsider their assumptions. Professor Anderson's expression softened slightly, as if he too was beginning to see the depth behind the rule he had just dismissed as unfair. Without raising her voice, Sophia had once again shifted the classroom's perspective, leaving a lasting impression that justice isn't always about equality, but about equity and fairness. A student near the back raised a hand tentatively. "Sophia, I get what you're saying about inheritance, but doesn't the idea of religious rules being fair rely on faith? How can we know these rules weren't just made up by people?" Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "You're right that faith plays a role. But consider this, Islam doesn't just ask for blind belief. It encourages seeking knowledge, reflecting on history, and using reason. For example, the Quran contains references to natural phenomena and societal structures that align with discoveries made centuries later." Professor Anderson scoffed. "Oh, here we go, science in the Quran. Can you provide an example?" "Sure," Sophia said, her tone even. "Take the reference to the development of the human embryo. Centuries before modern embryology, the Quran described the stages of human development in the womb. Scholars and scientists have been astounded by its accuracy compared to what we know today. How could someone in the Arabian desert 1,400 years ago detail something so specific?" The professor raised a skeptical brow, but remained silent, giving Sophia space to continue. "History also shows that early Islamic societies valued knowledge and scholarship, paving the way for advancements in medicine, mathematics, and astronomy. This isn't just faith, it's a tradition of inquiry and understanding." Her words resonated deeply. The student who asked the question nodded slowly, as did a few others. Sophia's response brought a new dimension to the discussion, emphasizing that faith, when combined with knowledge and reflection, forms a foundation far stronger than mere tradition. Even Professor Anderson seemed to pause, letting her reasoning sink in before he could conjure his next argument. Professor Anderson leaned back slightly, his tone less confrontational. "Even if there's historical context or scientific insight, what about moral principles? How can Islam claim universal morality when societies and cultures are so different?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "Professor, Islam's moral principles focus on universal human values: compassion, honesty, justice, and accountability. These aren't limited by time or place. For example, the prohibition of theft isn't about one culture's preference. It's about protecting people's property and fostering trust. The emphasis on charity isn't just for certain societies. It addresses poverty and inequality wherever it exists." Another student chimed in. "But don't all religions promote similar values?" Sophia nodded. "Many do, and that's exactly the point. These values are universal because they resonate with the human conscience. Islam doesn't invent morality. It aligns with what's inherently recognized as good. What sets it apart is the comprehensive framework it provides. It's not just about ideals, it offers practical guidance for individual behavior, family dynamics, and community welfare, all interlinked to create a balanced society." The room fell quiet again. Professor Anderson's initial resistance seemed to waver, replaced by contemplation. Even some of his previously staunch supporters appeared intrigued rather than defensive. Sophia's steady explanation emphasized that while cultures may differ, the core values that Islam upholds, justice, mercy, and responsibility, are shared human truths. Professor Anderson hesitated, then ventured into a more philosophical area. If Islam's principles are universal, why does it place so much emphasis on eternal reward and punishment? Isn't that just a form of control, dangling paradise as a carrot and threatening hell as a stick? Sophia met the question head-on. "Professor, consider this. Every action has consequences. whether in this life or beyond. Islam's concept of accountability is not about fear-mongering, it's about encouraging responsibility. If someone wrongs another person and escapes earthly justice, would it be fair if there were no ultimate reckoning? Heaven and hell aren't just carrot and stick, they're reflections of divine justice. One student raised a hand. But doesn't that seem unfair? What if someone just wasn't convinced? Sophia nodded. It's not about punishing doubt. Islam teaches that every soul will be judged individually, according to its knowledge, intentions, and opportunities. People who genuinely never encountered the message of Islam or couldn't understand it won't be treated the same as those who knew it and knowingly rejected it. Accountability in Islam is nuanced, not rigid. It considers circumstances, intentions, and the state of a person's heart. The discussion shifted from defiance to reflection. Even Professor Anderson seemed less confrontational, as if he were considering the possibility that ultimate justice might indeed serve a greater good. Sophia's calm responses offered a perspective that transcended immediate human concerns, opening the floor for deeper philosophical inquiry. The classroom was silent, save for the faint rustling of papers. Professor Anderson, who had once carried himself with unshakable confidence, now looked introspective, even vulnerable. The students, too, had shifted from an air of derision to one of quiet contemplation. Something profound had taken place, beyond debate, beyond argument. A door had opened. "Class," Professor Anderson began after a long pause, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard. "I'll admit, I came into this discussion with my own preconceptions. I saw Islam as just another ideology to critique, another belief system to dismantle. But Sophia's responses have shown me a depth of reasoning and a sense of justice that I hadn't considered. She's made me realize that I don't know as much as I thought I did." Sophia met his gaze, her expression calm but resolute. "Professor, I don't think anyone comes to full understanding all at once. It's a journey. What's important is the willingness to seek truth sincerely. That's all I ever hope to show." One by one, other students began to chime in. Some expressed their surprise at how Islam's teachings made sense when framed through logic and justice. Others admitted that they'd never truly considered what their laughter and jeers said about their own beliefs. For the first time, the room felt unified in its curiosity, rather than divided by prejudice. As the discussion came to a close, Professor Anderson offered a closing remark that no one expected. "I won't claim to have it all figured out, but today I learned that my knowledge has limits. Maybe it's time I start reading the Quran with an open mind, not just as a critic, but as someone seeking to understand. I don't promise a sudden change, but I do promise to listen more carefully." Sophia nodded, grateful not for a victory, but for the seeds of reflection she had planted. The room emptied slowly, the air heavy with newfound respect and thoughtfulness. For the first time, it felt like the walls of misunderstanding had begun to crack, letting in light where there had once been only shadows. Dear friends, tonight I invite you not only to listen, but to open the quieter chamber of your hearts. For the story you are about to hear transcends mere debate, victory, or defeat. It begins on a dusty street in Lobamba, the legislative capital of Eswatini, in a modest home whose corrugated iron roof rattles like a tambourine whenever storms drift down from the hills. Here lives 9-year-old Alaya Tabisa, small in stature, gentle in tone, yet harboring an intellect and courage that unsettle even the most seasoned scholars. Every dawn before sunrise, Alaya's father Musa unlocks the workshop that shares a wall with their kitchen. He smells of pine dust and lemon oil. His fingers bear the ribbons of splinters from his carpentry. Though his formal schooling ended after vocational college, Musa treats books like oxygen cylinders. At night, by the golden glow of a single lamp, he reads aloud from dog-eared biographies of Ibn Sina, Ibn Khaldun, and Marie Curie, insisting that curiosity is the calorie of the soul. Alia's mother, who sells woven baskets at the local market, complements these lessons with soft skills, patience, empathy, and the art of answering questions with wisdom instead of anger. Public schools in the district often divorce faith from inquiry so completely that children grow suspicious of belief. To counter this, Lobamba's Muslim community organizes a flexible home curriculum for its youth. Yet every Friday, Elia and her peers attend the city's Interfaith Study Center, a pale yellow building with louvered windows, forever open to let eucalyptus-scented breezes drift through reading nooks. Here, children aged 9 to 16 sit in circles on polypropylene rugs, comparing scriptures, evolution charts, parables, and planetary orbits. An experiment in early dialogue that local officials hope will douse sectarian sparks before they flare. Then one dry season Friday, a glossy poster appears on the study center door. Oxford-Harvard philosopher Dr. Samuel Measy to lecture on the illusion of God. Samuel's reputation precedes him, like thunder rolling ahead of lightning. Video clips show him dismantling bishops in Nairobi, rabbis in Tel Aviv, monks in Seoul. He is as handsome as carved granite tends to be, and just as unyielding. When he strides onto the low stage, his charcoal suit seems to drink the fluorescent glare. His diction clips each word as though trimming hedges. He opens with a smooth but razor-sharp rhetoric. Morality is relative. Heaven and hell are psychological prosthetics. Religion is a social construct born from mankind's terror of death. Heads nod. Dissenters flinch. A handful of priests, rabbis, and pastors attempt rebuttals, but stumble on his vocabulary. When the moderator finally invites questions, silence spreads like cold water across tile floors. It is then that Alia's slim hand rises. Gasps flutter. She steps forward in sandals that whisper against the tiled aisle. Cradling a sky-blue hijab around her small face, she thanks the professor, then offers a sentence that fractures the air like a pebble against glass. "Sir Doctor, you said religion sprouts from fear of death, yet does fear not also germinate the search for meaning? If that meaning proves coherent, eternal, and greater than ourselves, might it not point to something beyond fear itself?" The hall holds its breath. Samuel tilts his head, an acknowledgement of unexpected resistance. He counters with existential jargon. Alia listens, then quotes Quranic verses on the clay of creation, on hearts seeing more clearly than eyes, on knowledge descending through prophets. She does not recite by rote, but unpacks each line with simple analogies drawn from daily life. "I am not afraid to die, Mr. Doctor," she concludes, voice steady but soft. "My story does not end on the last page of this life's chapter. I do not require a laboratory to measure my mother's nightly prayers. I feel them in my chest, warm as fresh bread." Teachers bow their heads. Teenagers wipe glistening cheeks. Even Dr. Samuel, conqueror of so many debates, stands still. When the session ends, no applause follows, only the uneasy hum of worldview tectonics shifting beneath polished veneers. By dawn, a grainy recording ricochets across WhatsApp groups. Admirers hail the child's brilliance. Skeptics accuse conservative clerics of puppeteering her. Dr. Vanessa N. Cube, an icon of secular education, persuades Mbaban State University to host a televised panel. Alia versus 4 scholars under bright studio lights. The invitation reaches the Tabisa home like a verdict. Musa fears media wolves. Alia, stirring mint tea, replies, "If I hide, they'll say faith fears questions. If I attend, at least questions meet answers." On debate day, the auditorium glows with halogen intensity. Samuel sits rigid, pride bruised. Vanessa's crimson blazer could cut paper. An agnostic philosopher from Cape Town drums evolutionary data on his knee. A Kenyan liberal theologian caresses a threadbare Bible. Stagehands stack cushions so Alaya's chin reaches the mic. For 40 minutes, scholars volley statistics, neural imaging, crusade body counts, parasite theories. Alaya annotates margins with arrows and stick figures. When the moderator gestures her turn, Alaya stands, greets the crowd in Arabic, Swazi, and English, then speaks of nights spent lying atop her father's workshop roof, mapping Orion's path. I felt observed, not threatened, but patiently. Like a teacher waiting for a pupil's question, she says. She weaves cosmology with scripture. Logic is a lamp. Faith is the oil. A lamp without oil illuminates nothing but its own emptiness. Vanessa counters, certainty has burned libraries and shackled minds. Alaya acknowledges tragedies, then asks softly, are antibiotics innocent if the same laboratories produce atom bombs? Should we blame the tool or the hand? A murmur of agreement ripples. Samuel attempts a neuroscientific knockout. Mystical bliss equals temporal parietal firing. Alaya nods. If those sparks turn thieves into donors and liars into truth-tellers, they testify to mercy, not meaninglessness. The live broadcast ends. Pundits declare winners. Viewers at home feel there are no winners, only a shift in perspective. Outside, anonymous letters slide under the Tabisa's door. Silence your brat, or we will. A teacher publicly inspects Alaya's work for signs of coaching. 2 carpentry contracts vanish. Under the radar, Samuel begins crafting a documentary. Provocative illusion of truth. Children, religion, and collective imagination. To depict Alaya as a brainwashed oddity. Junior editor Sandil Dlamini watches raw footage. Alaya tenderly helps a cameraman recover fallen batteries, trembles before each appearance, then wipes tears alone afterward. His conscience ignites. At dawn, he resigns. Blogs an exposé titled, What They Spliced Out of the Little Girl, complete with timestamps and ethical violations. Sponsors flee by noon. Samuel's project collapses under its own deception. Cornered, Samuel proposes an audacious pivot. A cross-continental journey with Alaya, live-streamed unedited. Monasteries, labs, slums, cathedrals. Alaya ponders and says, truth enjoys long walks. Musa nods, recalling his own nights of study. The trip begins in Pretoria's Neurosyn lab, where fMRI scans display worship-induced euphoria. That night, Alaya asks, who designed a brain capable of both algebra and awe? Samuel jots notes, bereft of a crisp rejoinder. They speak with Tibetan monks chanting by moonlight. One says, doubt is the salt of faith. In Zurich, quantum physicists admit wonder when equations hint at hidden order. In Gaza, orphaned children shout prayers over rubble. Every place, 2 questions rise. What is real? What is good? Respect sprouts. Yet unseen adversaries panic, unearthing Musa's student organization records to smear him as an extremist. Contracts vanish further. Alaya's mother falls ill. One evening, Alaya collapses in tears. They wound father because they fear the fruit, she says. Musa comforts her. When they cannot fell the trunk, they strike the branch nearest the fruit. Alaya dries her eyes. Then I will not be silent anymore. That night she writes an open letter, films it under a baobab at sunset, voice wavering. I wrote this not to win, not to fight, but to touch hearts that still listen. They say I am a tool of my father. I am only a child who loves the truth, who asks because I wish to know. If you want to attack, attack me, but spare my father. He has lifted no weapon save love. Within 12 hours, the video passes 1 million views. Universities distance themselves further. Samuel, humbled, rereads notes of Alaya asking if love must be proven with numbers. The question haunts him. Hackers then surface deepfake clips of Aliyah preaching sectarian hate. Confusion reigns, support falters. At this nadir, Father Emmanuel, a revered peace-builder across faiths, convenes a private retreat. A Jewish rabbi, a Buddhist monk, an agnostic scientist, a Muslim women's activist, Samuel and Aliyah. Shoes off, they gather around a clay water jug, sharing childhood vulnerabilities. Aliyah asks, if truth cannot be monopolized, why compete to silence? Samuel's voice cracks, because I feared I might be wrong, and my ego could not bear a child's honesty. Reporters ambush them leaving, dubbing the meeting a conspiracy. Volunteers are arrested. Musa's workshop loses its lease. Despair hovers until a handwritten letter arrives from Amara, an 11-year-old in Uganda. People call me strange for wondering about God. Your courage made me brave. Hope rekindles. The Tabisas relocate to a rented room beyond city limits and convert a disused goat shed into the House of Questions. Saturdays bloom with children of all creeds sitting on straw mats, asking why lightning zigzags or if an atheist can recite psalms. Aliyah moderates with a bamboo bell. 3 chimes for silence, 1 for laughter. One sweltering afternoon, Aliyah walks to a Soweto football field. Vendors, students, and taxi drivers form a crescent. Without a microphone, she speaks. I once thought truth was a straight line. Now I see it's a tapestry. Each of us holds a thread. If we pull too hard, the fabric tears. She reads Amara's letter aloud. A weary man named Victor steps forward, admitting he once signed petitions to silence her. Last night my son asked, Dad, if God answers all, why fear questions? I had no reply. Today I came to say sorry. And thank you. Tears flow. Strangers embrace as shadows merge into one shape on the dirt. Videos of that silent communion circulate without dramatic music or captions, just faces listening to one another breathe. Journalists revise their narratives, admitting they chased controversy instead of truth. Months later, Samuel mails a slim manuscript, The Girl Who Asked Too Much, to a small Cape Town press. The final line reads, Truth is not a trophy, it is a sea. We do not win it, we immerse. The Tabisas never recapture the quiet of their pre-fame life, yet they discover something sturdier. Musa crafts desks for village schools. Aliyah's mother teaches basket weaving to widows, seasoning lessons with parables of patience. Aliyah prepares for medical college and still sketches constellations inside her frayed sky-blue notebook. On its inside cover, she inscribes a credo. Ask humbly, listen lovingly, answer honestly. The rest belongs to Allah. Sparks fly across continents. In Jakarta, a coding club names its charity algorithm Aliyahs. In Brazil, a physics graduate ends her dissertation with a poem titled Psalm of the Electron. In Washington, educators debate adding the Lobamba Dialogues case study to global curricula. NGOs fund satellite internet for 13 rural schools after streaming the House's sessions. Girls in Mali design apps pairing irrigation tips with Quranic verses on rain. Boys in Lesotho build cardboard spectroscopes to analyze well water. Their notebooks and project photos land in Lobamba, where Aliyah responds at dawn by lantern light. Years drift forward like quiet tides. A gray-bearded Samuel slips into the House of Questions one Ramadan, volunteering under the name Uncle Sam. He repairs benches and polishes chalkboards. Only Musa and Aliyah know his secret. On the final night of fasting, he accepts her mother's suhoor of millet porridge. Between spoonfuls, Samuel confesses, I once thought certainty opposite doubt. Now I see certainty unexamined is merely dogma with better cologne. Aliyah pours him hibiscus tea under a sky stippled with silver stars. When I was young, Samuel admits, I plotted constellations to feel control over the night. Now I chart them to feel included. Months later, Aliyah receives a letter from a prestigious European humanitarian prize. The award's stipend could rebuild Musa's ruined workshop twice over. Journalists descend. Aliyah thanks them but respectfully withdraws, suggesting the funds establish a public database for rural school experiments. Headlines invert. Girl declines cash, chooses Curiosity Commons. Back in Lobamba, the market where her mother once sold baskets now stocks solar lanterns, coding manuals, and laminated star maps. Vendors tell tourists, she's busy being ordinary. Ordinary now means tutoring calculus at dawn, translating neurology articles into Swazi at noon, drafting clinic triage protocols at dusk, and ending each day with the same bedtime dua her mother taught when she was 5, words moving across her lips like oars, carving gentle waves. One rainy evening, Amara, now 16, arrives unannounced, clutching a suitcase painted with watercolor nebulae. She traveled across 2 countries by bus to thank Aliyah face to face. Their hug is seismic yet silent, as if 2 tectonic plates have finally found alignment. They step into the house of questions, where laughter mingles with sandalwood and chalk dust. Wind carries the scent of future possibilities, a world where nobody is penalized for asking why meaning matters. And if years from now a child sits beneath unfamiliar stars, trembling with the urge to wonder, may they recall the girl in the sky-blue hijab, deciding, just for a moment, not to fear the unknown, because the unknown often holds the next conversation the world desperately needs. Under the shade of a sprawling tree, in the quiet campus garden of the University of North Sumatra, Arif sat alone, his back against the rough bark. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. It was the perfect setting for reflection, but Arif's mind was far from peaceful. He had been wrestling with questions that refused to leave him in peace, questions about sin, forgiveness, and the very nature of justice. Why does sin have to be inherited? He whispered to himself. Why must forgiveness require blood? Arif had once been a devout Christian, faithfully attending church every Sunday and following the teachings he'd grown up with. But over time, the doctrines began to weigh on him. He struggled to understand why a loving God would need to sacrifice his son in such a gruesome manner. The concept of original sin, that every human carried the stain of Adam's transgression, felt unfair. If God was truly just, why punish everyone for one man's mistake? It was during one of these introspective afternoons that Pastor Jonathan Harson appeared. Known for his sharp mind and unyielding faith, Pastor Jonathan was not a man easily swayed by differing opinions. He approached Arif, Bible in hand, his gaze steady and direct. "Arif," the pastor began, his tone calm but laced with authority, "I hear you've been questioning the foundations of the faith. Tell me, why don't you believe that Jesus' sacrifice was necessary to atone for human sin?" Arif looked up, meeting the pastor's eyes. "Pastor," he said softly, "it just doesn't make sense to me. How can the sins of one person be forgiven by punishing someone else? That's not justice. It's a substitution. I've been reading, studying, and praying, and I've come to realize that forgiveness should come directly from God's mercy, not through blood." Pastor Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Arif, we are all born into sin. It's not something we can cleanse ourselves. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Without his sacrifice, there is no redemption." Arif nodded, his voice calm but resolute. "I understand what you're saying, Pastor, but I've found guidance in a different place. In the Quran, it says that no soul bears the burden of another. This rings true to me. A just God wouldn't place the sins of all humanity on one innocent man. Instead, he would forgive those who sincerely repent." Their conversation continued, both men speaking with conviction. Pastor Jonathan quoted scripture with precision, while Arif responded with verses from the Quran that he had carefully studied. The exchange was not loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the surrounding students who had gathered nearby. It was not just a debate. It was a deep, honest search for truth. The campus garden seemed quieter now, the sound of the rustling leaves replaced by the intense exchange between Arif and Pastor Jonathan. Several students had gathered a short distance away, their conversations hushed as they observed. They had heard about the viral article Arif had written, challenging the traditional concept of atonement. Many of them came simply out of curiosity, wondering how this young convert would hold his ground against the well-respected pastor. "Arif," Pastor Jonathan began, his voice measured but firm, "you've mentioned forgiveness directly from God. But do you not see that without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin? This isn't just a doctrine. It's the foundation of salvation." Arif remained seated, his expression calm. "Pastor," he replied, "I have read those teachings, but I ask myself, why must a loving, merciful God demand the blood of an innocent to forgive the guilty? Wouldn't true mercy mean granting forgiveness out of His infinite grace?" The pastor's grip on his Bible tightened. "It's not about God needing it, Arif," he countered. "It's about the justice of God. The penalty for sin is death. Jesus took that penalty so that we wouldn't have to." Arif nodded thoughtfully. "But isn't it also just, Pastor, to forgive without a sacrifice? The Quran says, 'Do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Indeed, Allah forgives all sins.' Doesn't that show a justice tempered by direct mercy?" The tension grew thicker, but neither man raised his voice. It was an exchange of convictions, not an argument. As the debate continued, the students around them leaned in, some even taking notes. The dialogue was not just a clash of faiths, it was a moment that invited everyone to reflect more deeply on the nature of forgiveness, justice, and mercy. Pastor Jonathan's jaw tightened, his weathered face showing signs of frustration. "Arif," he said, his voice sharp but controlled, "you're quoting from your new faith's holy book, but that doesn't change the truth. Christ's sacrifice was foretold in the Scriptures. It was God's plan to redeem humanity through His Son's pure blood. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins." Arif met his gaze steadily. "Pastor, I understand that this is what you believe," he replied. "But I ask myself, why does a merciful God require a sacrifice to forgive His creation? Doesn't mercy mean forgiving directly, without conditions?" Jonathan shook his head, the well-worn Bible in his hand trembling slightly. "It's not about conditions," he countered. "It's about justice. Sin demands a penalty. Jesus took that penalty so that we wouldn't have to." "And yet," Arif responded, his tone calm and measured, "I find myself returning to a simple question. Isn't it also just to forgive without a penalty? To show mercy without the need for blood? The Quran tells us not to despair of God's mercy, that He forgives all sins if we turn to Him. Isn't that a form of justice that reflects both His power and His mercy?" The air in the campus garden seemed heavier as the debate unfolded. A group of students nearby exchanged glances. Some were nodding, intrigued by the perspective Arif offered, while others were visibly uncomfortable. Pastor Jonathan's voice rose slightly, as if trying to assert authority. "Arif, you're playing with concepts you barely understand," he said. "You've just embraced Islam. How can you claim to know the depths of theology?" Arif's calm expression didn't falter. "Pastor," he said, "I'm not claiming to know everything. I'm just asking questions. Questions about justice, about love, and about what it truly means to forgive." Pastor Jonathan took a deep breath, steadying himself before responding. "Arif," he began, his voice softer now, "you're looking at this from a purely human perspective. God's justice and mercy are not bound by our limited understanding. The sacrifice of Christ was a divine act that transcends earthly logic. It was the ultimate expression of love and justice intertwined." Arif tilted his head slightly, his calm demeanor unchanged. "I appreciate that viewpoint, Pastor," he said, "but I still struggle to see why a perfect, all-powerful God would need such an act to forgive his creation. If God is truly sovereign, doesn't he have the power to forgive without intermediaries, without sacrifice?" Jonathan's hand gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles whitening. "It's not about what God needs," he again said. "It's about what we needed. Humanity was so lost in sin that only a perfect sacrifice could reconcile us to him. Jesus willingly took on that burden. It wasn't weakness or limitation, it was divine strength." Arif nodded thoughtfully. "I see," he said slowly, "and yet the Quran teaches that God's mercy is infinite, that turning to him with sincerity is enough to receive forgiveness. There's no need for bloodshed. It's a simpler path, a path that still calls for humility, repentance, and a commitment to doing good. Doesn't that kind of mercy also show divine strength?" Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but he hesitated. He looked at Arif, this young man who spoke not with anger or arrogance, but with genuine curiosity. For a brief moment, the tension between them seemed to dissipate, replaced by the shared human struggle to understand the divine. A noticeable change had come over the students gathered around the garden. Whispers buzzed from one group to the next, filling the air with an electric curiosity. Arif, still sitting calmly, observed the rippling effect of their exchange. His heart was steady, but his mind remained sharp. He knew that Pastor Jonathan's next words would likely shape how the crowd viewed their entire discussion. Pastor Jonathan leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly as he spoke. "Arif, what you don't seem to grasp," he said, his voice low and measured, "is that faith isn't just about reasoning things out. It's about accepting the mystery, the beauty of a truth that's beyond us. Jesus' sacrifice was not meant to make sense in a worldly way. It was meant to show a higher love, one that defies logic." Arif nodded thoughtfully, then replied, "I understand that faith often involves accepting what's beyond reason. But isn't faith also enriched by reflection, by asking difficult questions, by seeking answers that resonate not just with the heart, but with the mind as well? Islam teaches us that God's justice and mercy are clear. There's no contradiction between them. If God is truly just, he wouldn't hold one person accountable for another's sins. That's why the Quran emphasizes personal accountability and repentance." Jonathan's face tightened for a moment, but then he sighed. "Arif," he said, "you're looking for human fairness, but divine justice operates on a different plane. It's about restoring humanity to God's presence, something we couldn't achieve on our own. Christ's sacrifice wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of redemption." "But Pastor," Arif gently countered, "if God's love is boundless, why wouldn't he simply forgive? Wouldn't that show even greater power? An absolute mercy that needs no intermediary?" His voice was calm, but his words landed with a quiet firmness that seemed to echo in the minds of those listening. By now, the small crowd had grown quiet, hanging on every word as though they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple conversation. Arif and Pastor Jonathan's voices, calm but resolute, seemed to carry a weight that drew everyone's focus. Even those who had initially stood at a distance now crept closer, eager to hear how the discussion would unfold. Pastor Jonathan rubbed his temples for a moment before speaking again. "Arif," he began, "you're asking these questions as if human logic can fully comprehend divine will. The heart of faith isn't about demanding every answer. It's about surrender, about recognizing that we can never grasp the full scope of God's plan." Arif met his gaze steadily. "I agree that we can't fully comprehend God's plan," he said, "but what we can comprehend is the consistency of his justice and mercy. In the Quran, we find a God who is repeatedly described as the most merciful and the most just. We don't see a God who requires innocent blood to forgive sin. Instead, we see a God who simply forgives when repentance is sincere. Jonathan shifted his weight. His voice softened, though it still held conviction. That's where we differ, Arif. For us, forgiveness isn't cheap. It comes at a price, at a cost so great that only God himself could pay it through his Son. And yet, Pastor, Arif replied, if God is all-powerful, wouldn't it make him even greater if he forgave without requiring payment? If his mercy extended so far that he could forgive without conditions, wouldn't that demonstrate a love beyond any sacrifice? For a moment, the two men sat in silence. The crowd, too, remained still, the weight of Arif's words sinking in. Even Pastor Jonathan seemed to hesitate, searching for a response that would not come easily. The quietness of that moment spoke volumes, louder than any rebuttal could. Jonathan's expression shifted slightly, though he quickly masked any uncertainty. He cleared his throat and said, Arif, it seems to me that you're trying to fit God's actions into human logic. But God's ways are higher than ours. The crucifixion was not meant to be understood through earthly reasoning. It's a spiritual reality. You cannot always reason your way to divine truths. Arif tilted his head slightly. I understand what you mean, Pastor, he said, his tone calm and steady. But I'm not trying to reduce God's actions to human logic. I'm simply trying to understand why God, in his infinite mercy, would choose a path that appears to conflict with the idea of justice. Doesn't it make sense that a truly merciful God could forgive without requiring the blood of the innocent? Jonathan drew in a deep breath. Arif, he said, his voice growing more firm, God's justice and mercy are perfect. We believe that justice was fulfilled through the sacrifice of Jesus. It was not a punishment upon the innocent, but a gift, a divine intervention that humanity could not achieve on its own. Arif nodded thoughtfully, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. Pastor, he said at last, I understand that you see the crucifixion as an act of love, but in the Islamic understanding, God's love is no less profound. It is expressed through his direct forgiveness and his guidance for those who turn to him. There is no need for an intermediary. God is closer to us than our own veins. Doesn't that reflect a mercy that's even more immediate and unconditional? Jonathan fell silent for a moment as if searching for the right words. But before he could speak, one of the students watching from a distance called out softly, But if God can forgive directly, why make it so complicated? All eyes turned toward the voice. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Jonathan glanced at the student and then back at Arif. The debate was no longer just between the two of them. It had started to resonate with those listening, and it was clear that the discussion had stirred something deeper in everyone present. Jonathan leaned forward, his knuckles pressing against the edge of the table as he tried to steady himself. You speak so confidently, Arif, but let me ask you, if God's forgiveness is so immediate and unconditional, why does humanity still suffer? Why is there still pain, injustice, and sin in this world? Doesn't that show a need for divine intervention? A sacrificial act to break the cycle of sin? Arif met his gaze without hesitation. Pastor, he began, human suffering and sin don't stem from a lack of God's mercy. They come from our own choices. God has given us free will. The Quran makes it clear that this life is a test, and we are responsible for the outcomes of our own actions. Suffering isn't because God's mercy is limited, but because he allows us the freedom to choose. That freedom is part of his justice. The crowd murmured. Some nodded in agreement, others exchanged doubtful glances. Jonathan's expression tightened, his tone sharpening. And what happens when human choice fails? When evil persists and no amount of human repentance can undo the damage done? That's where we believe Jesus steps in. His sacrifice covers the debts that humanity can't pay on its own. Arif paused before replying, allowing Jonathan's words to settle. Pastor, If God's justice is perfect, then wouldn't it be more just for each soul to bear responsibility for its own actions rather than transferring that responsibility to someone else? Isn't it more meaningful for God to guide us toward repentance and personal accountability rather than placing the burden on an innocent being? Jonathan's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. The students watching from nearby seemed just as frozen, captivated by the exchange. The tension between the two men had shifted from confrontation to a deeper, quieter struggle over the very nature of justice, mercy, and love. Jonathan's composure was beginning to fray. His usual confidence was shaken by Arif's calm, rational approach. The crowd that had once seemed firmly on his side now appeared torn, some whispering amongst themselves, others sitting in thoughtful silence. The air in the campus park grew heavier, as if even nature itself was holding its breath. "You're missing the bigger picture," Jonathan finally said, his voice strained. "God's plan isn't meant to be dissected like a philosophical exercise. Faith requires acceptance of mysteries that we cannot fully understand. The sacrifice of Jesus, is it truly a mystery, Pastor?" Arif interrupted gently. "Or have we just never been encouraged to question it? Faith doesn't mean abandoning reason. Even the Quran encourages us to reflect, to ponder. Why is it so difficult to believe that God, in His infinite mercy, can forgive without the need for a sacrificial intermediary?" A murmur ran through the crowd. It wasn't just the content of Arif's argument, but the unshaken confidence in his voice that was turning heads. He wasn't there to attack. He was there to explain, to invite others into a conversation. His measured tone contrasted sharply with Jonathan's rising frustration. Jonathan pressed forward, his voice louder now. "You speak of reason, but faith isn't built on logic alone. It's about trust, about surrendering to the higher power's will." "Trust is important," Arif agreed, "but trust and understanding can go hand in hand. God gave us intellect and reasoning. Why would He do that if not for us to use them in our journey toward faith?" Jonathan fell silent, his shoulders stiff, his hands clenched at his sides as he looked at Arif, then at the gathering of students. For the first time, the balance of power seemed to shift. The pastor, so accustomed to leading and commanding the room, now found himself grappling with a young man's unwavering clarity. "I'm not here to defeat you, Pastor," Arif said, his voice steady but kind. "I'm here to show that faith and reason can coexist. The truth doesn't need to be forced. It simply needs to be seen." Jonathan said nothing. The students, many of whom had been recording the discussion on their phones, quietly reflected on what they had witnessed. Some nodded, others frowned, but nearly everyone felt that something profound had just taken place. The garden grew quiet. Pastor Jonathan stood in the center, looking around at the gathered students. His confidence was visibly shaken, his usually authoritative presence now subdued. For a moment, he simply stared at the Bible in his hands, as though searching for the words that would restore his command over the situation. But no words came. Arif remained seated, his expression calm but resolute. He didn't smile or gloat. He simply looked on as the man before him grappled with his own certainty. Around them, students whispered, their voices barely audible. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded slightly, their expressions contemplative. After a long pause, Jonathan finally spoke. His voice was softer now, almost hesitant. "I will not deny that you've given me much to think about, Arif. Perhaps there is more I need to reflect on, more than I have allowed myself to consider." Arif bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect. "Faith and understanding are not enemies, Pastor. They can walk hand in hand." Jonathan didn't respond immediately. He closed his Bible, held it against his chest, and turned to the crowd. "Let us not jump to conclusions. Let us all continue to seek truth, wherever it may lead us. That is all I can ask of myself, and all I can ask of you." With that, Jonathan walked away, leaving the gathering students in a hushed, thoughtful state. Many turned to Arif, their faces a mixture of admiration and curiosity. A few approached him, their questions tentative but genuine. Arif smiled gently. It's not about winning or losing. It's about seeking clarity, finding peace, and embracing the truth when it is revealed. That's all I'm trying to do. As he spoke, a sense of calm settled over the group. The tension of the debate was gone, replaced by a shared understanding that faith and reason could coexist, that truth was a journey, not a destination. And in that moment, the young man who had once been the quiet observer became a respected voice of wisdom and calm among his peers.